All right, welcome AP Euro to your Unit 6 review. Really, this is industrialism and its effects on Europe. We'll, uh, we'll give you an overview of the entire unit here to start off before we kind of get into sort of the test specific stuff, okay? If the internet will work with me here and actually load the video. There it is. All right, so industrialization and its effects. All right, so let's get into the overview. Obviously, we know that the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. It was based off of textiles. That was really the first mechanized products here. Um, there was a lot of state support throughout the continent of Europe for industry. In Britain, of course, it's a little bit different because it's more of a private investment. It's people going into the business of owning a factory and using their own capital investments. But in other places that didn't enjoy the natural benefits that Britain had, you did see state support for industry. You saw the emergence of new social classes. You get a kind of a hard and fast working class. You've got the middle class, of course, and then the elites, sort of the owners and the managers of these factories. You also get a growth of a lot of ideologies in this time period as people are trying to respond to this great social upheaval. And the Industrial Revolution, of course, affects politics and the economics and the and social aspects of everyday life in Europe. Realized that industry was slower growing in France, which had a much stronger agricultural base, and they were a little bit more conservative in this regard. Railroads and new communication technology would end up resulting in a more integrated economy. It's going to shrink the world basically. Volatile business cycles in the late 19th century. Basically, these are recessions. And in capitalism, you have boom and bust cycles, of course. But this would lead to the government using tariffs and monopolies to try and manage the market better to help their finances. Basically, they're experimenting. You also saw more leisure opportunities here in this time period, especially for the middle class and above. You're also going to see that begin to happen for working class as working class hours drop from 16-hour days down to 10-hour days. Industry in Prussia would allow it to become the leader in uniting Germany. And of course, urbanization is a major effect of the Industrial Revolution, and it caused a lot of issues in the cities: crime, sanitation, um, fires. I mean, there's a host of transportation in the cities, how to get around with so many people. There's a host of issues caused by urbanization, which of course is the rapid movement of people from the country to the city. You had conservatism rising and something called the Concert of Europe. These two together would suppress nationalist and liberal revolutions. They want to keep the status quo. They don't want nationalism because nationalism means that there are some groups out there controlled by other peoples. Think Austria here, that would have their own state. That's a big change. Obviously, that's not status quo at all. The revolutions of 1848 helped lead to the breakdown of this concert of Europe. This sort of idea um, that there's a balance of power and that the European nations would get together and decide foreign policy issues. During this time period, Russia finally emancipated its serfs in the 1860s, and it would attempt to modernize by bringing in industry. Eventually, that would lead to the Revolution of 1905, which we'll talk about in the next unit. Liberals in this time period wanted popular sovereignty, basically the idea that a group of people can rule themselves, and they wanted individual rights. There was a rising argument for for more male suffrage in this time period. Again, a lot of the male suffrage is limited to the upper classes, and so the argument is that all men should be able to vote. Socialism rises in this time period and calls for a redistribution of the world's wealth. They see it as concentrated in the hands of too few people, and that it should be enjoyed for the betterment of everyone. Anarchist, these are people who don't believe in government. They felt like government was unnecessary and that it should be abolished. Labor unions, of course, rise as a response to some of the bad tendencies of the industries in the early days. As the time period goes on, as the 19th century goes on, those unions are going to slowly begin to gain power. Liberalism changes from laissez-faire, from this idea of hands-off to capitalism and to private industries, to a policy of interventionism. This idea that you have to reform industries, maybe you have to institute a minimum wage, maybe you have to limit the number of hours they're allowed to work people. Basically, the people have to be protected. So liberalism goes through a change here. Reforms sought compulsory public education to promote nationalism and economic growth. Here, the idea is that everyone has to go to school because a better educated population means a better economy, and that while they're at school, we want them to love their country as much as we can get them to love it. All right, so now this is the test specific stuff. We want to talk about something called the putting out system, which really is your very early days of the Industrial Revolution, and it's based in textiles. Remember, it's a farmer's wife getting a bundle of cotton from or wool from somebody, buying from a merchant. She goes home and she makes dresses with it. She brings it back to him, and he sells it. So this creates a large and steady demand for clothing that becomes so big, so enormous that they can't do the putting out system anymore. They're going to have to build factories and bring the workers to the factories to do this, to keep up with demand. And none of this is possible without agriculture, of course. We know the enclosure acts are going to set aside land. It's going to make farming more efficient. And because farming becomes more efficient, well, we don't need as many people farming. So you have a lot of excess labor that really doesn't have anything to do. That causes some problems out in the rural areas. And it would actually free up labor to go to the cities, or these growing towns and cities, to become cheap labor in the factories. Social life changes certainly in this time period. We see the growth of the middle class, this bourgeois class, and basically they sought entertainment. Going to museums and shows and plays and stuff like that. They're using their leisure time here, and they also actually begin using contraception to limit the size of their family so that they can give what children they have a much better life, a higher standard of living, if you will. Labor in this time period, both government and private reforms led to better working classes or better working hours. So basically, there's enough of an outcry that these businesses are having to reform. They're having to change and make it better. And then in some cases where they're too slow in doing so, the government will come in and force them to reform as well. Again, unions are slowly gaining power in this time period. We got something called the British Corn Laws, which place high tariffs on imported grains. That's rough on the farmer, but great for the wealthy landowners. So the British Corn Laws would, they would limit that. They would take away the tariff on imported grains, and the wealthy landowners don't want that because, that would cost them money. Concert of Europe. The time period between the Congress of Vienna, remember, which was set down in 1815 to decide what was going to happen to Europe after Napoleon, and the Crimean War between the Ottoman Empire and the Russians. The Concert of Europe sought to achieve a consensus among powers on foreign policy questions. The idea is you deal with your stuff at home, but things that affect all of us, we need to come together and do what's best for Europe as a whole so that we keep the peace. Won't work, of course. We're gonna find our way to World War I anyway. All right, conservatism. It emphasized religion for maintaining social stability. Again, it's status quo. They felt like in the French Revolution that the loss of religion had hurt society in France, and so conservatives believe that religion has a very important role in social stability. Russia, very conservative here, mostly because it was less influenced by the Enlightenment ideals. So we know that Russia is going to be a little behind and that they're going to cling to manual labor from serfs. Under conservatism, there was exclusively male-dominated jobs such as lawyers and doctors. Now, there are women working in factories and stuff, but conservatives are going to have jobs like this as a no women allowed club, basically. Prince Metternich of Austria was a big proponent of conservatism, the keeping the status quo, believing in the monarchy, of course. The working class had finally moved by this time period beyond organized religion. So even though conservatives are emphasizing the importance of religion, the working class people have moved beyond it. It doesn't play nearly as big of a role in their lives. Gone are the days of religious wars in Europe. Liberalism, basically, they sought to have written constitutions to protect people's rights better, and they wanted wider suffrage. They wanted universal male suffrage, and in some cases, they even wanted suffrage for women, of course. Nationalism is, of course, the intense state pride that these European nation states are beginning to feel for themselves. We love to be British, we love to be German, etc. And they're going to use schools to basically brainwash, to instill the feelings of nationalism. You see the American flag behind me. We have several in the classroom, the Pledge of Allegiance, all that stuff. They're going to do similar things in these European nations. All right, industrial economies. Well, they're based off of cheap labor. All right, that's a necessity, and you're going to see a mass movement of people from rural areas to urban areas. It's based off of coal and iron. Britain and Germany become the two biggest economies. Obviously, Britain early on, then Germany will actually surpass it. And you see this massive shift from human to mechanical power. No more winding cranks and stuff like that. We're going to use steam engines, and we're going to eventually use electricity. You had a group called Luddites. They were English textile workers. They don't like all the new technology coming in because it's putting them out of a job. A lot of them are shop owners, and so they're going to break machines. This is their way of resisting this new technology that's taking their jobs away from them. Basically, their rebellion lasts for about 5 years, from 1811 to 1816, and it's eventually going to be suppressed by force, and they're basically going to be gone. The Zollverein was the Prussian, the German customs union, which the entire point of it was to create an enlarged trading area and to unite the German states, as this would be seen as beneficial to all. All right, Louis Philippe in France, he promised to be a constitutional monarch. He lied. He blocked expanded voting rights. There was also a bread shortage during his reign, which is going to work against him, of course. So he's forced to abdicate his throne, and his overthrow is going to help lead to the 1848 revolutions. France, Prussia, Austria, Italy, all those nations were affected by the 1848 revolutions. Feminism, they sought suffrage for women, of course. They wanted expanded job opportunities for the ladies. No more of this. If you're a lady, you can't have this job. They wanted women to be able to own property, and they felt that women should have more rights to a divorce, being able to get a divorce, and property rights coming from a divorce. All right, guys, that is your unit in a nutshell. That's your test in a nutshell. You need to go through this several times. Once really isn't enough. Use this to make yourself successful on your exam. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys soon in class.